It was the summer of 1893 when the town of Marrow's Point gathered to celebrate what they believed was a gift from heaven. The eldest Crowley daughter, Margaret, was finally marrying. Bells rang through the mist, their echoes drifting across the harbor where gulls circled and the sea breathed in slow rhythm. People came from every corner of town to see her walk down the aisle, a vision of lace and light beneath the shadow of the old stone chapel. Her sisters stood behind her, 7 women in pale dresses, each with the same soft features and quiet, watchful eyes. They hardly spoke, even as the guests toasted and laughed. There was a calmness about them that felt too still, too perfect, like something rehearsed. Their mother had been gone for years, buried behind the family house that stood alone by the salt marsh. The townsfolk still remembered her sermons about purity, about how women must keep the world clean of sin. When she died, the sisters stopped attending church. They kept to themselves, their curtains drawn, the lights in their house burning late into the night. Some said they prayed for her soul. Others said they spoke to her. But on Margaret's wedding day, they smiled. For the first time in years, they looked almost human. Her groom, Thomas Hale, was a kind man from the next town over, a carpenter with soft hands and a nervous laugh. He seemed proud to have won Margaret's heart, though no one could remember ever seeing them together before. The ceremony went on without flaw. The rain that had threatened all morning cleared as she said her vows. When they left in a horse-drawn carriage, heading toward the coast for their honeymoon, the town cheered. The Crowley name, it seemed, would finally know happiness. 3 days later, the cheering stopped. Thomas never came back. The innkeeper from their seaside lodging said he saw the couple dine together that first night, then walk along the cliffs. The next morning, only Margaret returned. She told the authorities her husband had gone swimming before sunrise and never resurfaced. The tide was searched for days, but no body was found. She spoke calmly, her hands folded, her dress still damp with seawater. When asked if she wanted to stay in town, she simply replied, "There is work to be done at home." The townspeople wanted to believe her grief. They wanted to forgive the strangeness of the Crowley women, their pale faces and measured words. But when Margaret was seen at her mother's grave the following week, singing softly into the soil, something in Marrow's Point shifted. Children were told not to wander near the marsh. Men crossed the street when a Crowley sister passed. And still, at night, the faint sound of hymns drifted from their house by the water, carried on the wind like a warning. Something had begun, though no one yet knew what. The Crowley house rose like a wounded creature from the edge of the marsh, its roof sagging, its windows fogged with salt and age. The path to it was narrow, swallowed by reeds and standing water that reflected the sky like glass. Those who ventured close said the air grew heavy there, that the marsh muted every sound, the chirp of crickets, the flap of wings, even one's own footsteps. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. Inside, time did not move the way it did elsewhere. The 7 sisters lived there, bound to the ghost of their mother. Her presence filled every room, in portraits, in her books, in the strict order she left behind. Margaret, the eldest, ruled them as she once ruled their prayers. Lillian and Evelyn kept the kitchen, where the smell of brine and herbs lingered year-round. Clara sewed shrouds for no one in particular. Ruth tended the garden, though nothing seemed to grow, and the twins Alice and Ada still slept in the same narrow bed, whispering to each other long after the lamps went out. Their mother had raised them with one commandment that outlived her: a man's seed corrupts, a woman's blood cleanses. She called it divine balance. Every Sunday she would kneel with her daughters in the parlor, her hands red from some unknown work, and tell them that purity demanded pain. Her diary, later found hidden beneath the floorboards, spoke of visions in the tide and a voice that told her to preserve what was sacred. It was said she stopped sleeping after that, walking barefoot through the marsh until dawn, whispering to something no one else could see. After her death, the sisters carried her rituals forward. They cleaned the house with salt water, lit candles by the mirrors, and never allowed a man to step inside. Margaret became the keeper of her mother's Bible, though the words inside were not all scripture anymore. Pages had been torn, rewritten, stained with what looked like blood. When neighbors brought gifts of bread or fish, the sisters accepted them in silence and placed them on the table without eating. They believed that to take food from a man was to take his sin. At night, faint singing drifted from the attic, a hymn so low it sounded like mourning. Sometimes, travelers passing through the marsh claimed they saw figures in white moving behind the curtains, swaying together as if in prayer. Others spoke of lights beneath the ground, like candles burning beneath the soil. No one dared to look too closely. In Marrow's Point, the Crowley house had become something more than a home. It was a boundary, a warning, and every soul who looked upon it knew that whatever lived inside was not meant to be disturbed. It began quietly, as most horrors do, one wedding after another, each more modest than the last, each ending the same way, with silence. Between 1893 and 1899, all 7 Crowley sisters took husbands. The townspeople had grown wary by then, but curiosity often outweighed fear. The Crowley women were striking, ethereal almost, their calm voices and stillness drawing men in like moths to a lantern's glow. Each sister married in the same chapel where Margaret once stood, the same white flowers, the same vows whispered beneath the same flickering candles. And each time, within weeks, her husband vanished. The newspapers began to notice, "The Mourning Brides of Marrow's Point." One headline read. The article described their beauty, their faith, their tragedy, all wrapped in a strange reverence, as though the town pitied them. Reporters came by train and left before sundown. The marsh unsettled them, the sound of unseen water moving beneath the grass, the faint hum of voices that carried with the wind. They wrote what they could see, the shuttered windows, the black veils, the women standing in their yard like statues, but never what they felt, that strange sense of being watched by the house itself. When the first husband vanished, it was called misfortune. The second, an accident. By the third, people whispered that something unholy was nesting in the Crowley home. Still, no one dared accuse them directly. The Crowleys had money, inherited from their mother's estate, and a kind of dark charm that left men uncertain whether to fear or admire them. And each sister, after losing her husband, returned home to the marsh, calm and unbroken, wearing her mourning dress as if it were armor. The evidence was thin, but pieces surfaced: a wedding ring half buried in mud, a bloodied handkerchief near the tide line, and once, a small silver scalpel, etched with the letter C. The sheriff claimed it belonged to a doctor from town, lost years before. Others said it was part of something older, a ritual tool, passed down from the Crowley matriarch herself. When investigators questioned Margaret, she smiled softly and said only, "You search for what the sea already owns." But the sea was not the only thing hungry at Marrow's Point. One neighbor, an aging widower named Elias Finch, kept a journal. In it he wrote of screams that rose from the marsh at night, cut short by hymns sung in perfect unison. He described seeing smoke, the color of iron, curling from behind the house. He wrote of 7 shadows dancing against the fog, moving as one. Then his entries stopped. He was never seen again. By 1899, no man from the surrounding towns would go near the Crowley estate. The mail stopped arriving. The path to the house disappeared beneath reeds and silt. Only the sound of singing remained, faint but constant, threading through the mist like a lullaby for the dead. Inside that house, the sisters waited, serene, untroubled, guarding something the rest of the world was never meant to find. The final wedding took place on a grey October afternoon, the kind where the light never truly arrived. Ada Crowley, the youngest of the sisters, was the last to marry. Her groom, Jonathan Pierce, was a banker from Boston, well-groomed, skeptical, and proud of his reason. He was drawn to Ada's quietness, her way of listening without ever really answering. She seemed untouched by the world, and he mistook that stillness for innocence. They wed in a private ceremony, with no family present, but her sisters, standing in pale dresses like ghosts. The air smelled of salt and rain. When the carriage departed toward the Crowley estate, a fog followed it down the road, swallowing the sound of the horses. By morning, Jonathan Pierce was gone. Ada sat at the breakfast table in her wedding gown, her hands folded neatly over her lap. When the innkeeper asked where her husband had gone, she said only, "He is beyond harm now." That answer brought the sheriff, and with him, men from the state. It was the first time in years that lawmen crossed the boundary of the Crowley property. They found the house strangely orderly, every surface polished, every curtain drawn. The smell of salt water hung in the air, sharp and metallic. Upstairs in the bathroom, they found a claw-footed tub streaked with blood, its water gone cold. Beside it lay a wooden crucifix, carved with strange looping symbols no priest could recognize. When they reached the cellar, their lanterns flickered as if the air itself resisted light. There were 7 chairs arranged in a circle, each one draped in white cloth. In the center, a shallow basin crusted with dried blood. Around it, salt was poured in careful lines, unbroken. It wasn't chaos they found down there. It was symmetry, intention. The sisters did not flee, did not weep, did not speak above a whisper. They were taken into custody one by one, their faces serene as marble. Lillian carried a rosary made from human teeth. Evelyn held a Bible that had been rewritten by hand. Ada, the youngest, the only one who smiled, turned to one of the officers as he led her away and said, "He's not dead. He's free now." The words lingered, soft but certain, like a prayer that had already been answered. The autopsy never took place. There was no body to examine. The blood in the tub matched no known type. And what little evidence existed vanished before it could be catalogued. Some said the Crowley women had been taught to believe that mutilation was mercy, that the flesh was a cage, and by unmaking it, they released the soul. Others whispered that their mother's voice had never stopped guiding them. Whatever truth lay beneath those hymns and stains, it was clear that their work had reached its end. 7 brides, 7 husbands, 1 ritual completed. The trial began in the winter of 1900, when the world outside the courthouse was covered in snow and the wind from the coast howled like a grieving mother. Crowds gathered before dawn, filling every step and window, desperate to catch a glimpse of the women whose names had become legend. The Crowley sisters entered the courtroom together, draped in black from neck to heel, their faces pale and unreadable beneath their veils. They did not look at the jury, nor the judge, nor the sea of reporters that filled the benches. Instead, they walked in silence, hands clasped, humming softly as they took their seats. The sound was faint at first, like a lullaby, but it lingered in the air long after they stopped. The newspapers called them America's first female cult. The public called them monsters, but those who sat close enough to see their eyes said something about them was wrong in a way that couldn't be explained. There was no guilt there, no fear, only stillness. As the prosecutor listed each charge, 7 counts of murder, desecration, and occult ritual, the sisters did not flinch. The words seemed to slide past them like water off stone. When shown photographs of the cellar, the blood basin, the carved crucifix, Ada closed her eyes and began to hum again. The others joined her until the judge ordered silence. Evidence was thin. No bodies, no remains, nothing that proved what the Crowley sisters had done. But what was found in the marsh told another story. Jars, sealed in wax, buried beneath the reeds, each containing what looked like human tissue preserved in alcohol. Etched into the glass of each jar was a single word: redeemed. Investigators also found symbols carved into driftwood, arranged in circles that pointed toward the old house. One witness, a fisherman named Callow, testified he'd seen shapes moving through the fog at night. tall figures that bled from their mouths, wandering aimlessly toward the sea. The defense argued insanity, claiming years of isolation had driven the sisters to madness, that they had inherited their mother's delusions of purity and divine cleansing. Yet no physician could explain how 7 women could move, think, and speak with such eerie unity. They refused meals from the jailers, surviving only on bread and water. They sang instead of talking. They prayed instead of pleading. When the verdict came, the room fell silent. The jury declared them guilty on all counts, but unfit for execution. The judge, his hands trembling, signed the order himself. The Crowley sisters would not hang. They would be confined indefinitely at the newly constructed Bellhurst Asylum, a place built for those beyond saving. As they were led away, Ada turned once more toward the crowd. Her voice was calm, almost tender. "You will see them again," she said. No one asked who she meant. But that night, as snow began to fall over Marrow's Point, several townspeople swore they saw 7 silhouettes moving through the marsh, silent, bleeding, and free. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 6, Bellhurst Asylum? The songs beneath the floor. Bellhurst Asylum stood on a lonely hill overlooking the Atlantic, its brick walls darkened by years of salt and rain. When the Crowley sisters arrived, the staff whispered that something in the air changed. Lamps flickered more often. Clocks stopped for no reason. The sound of footsteps echoed in empty corridors when no one was there. The sisters were placed together in a single stone cell in the west wing, far from the others. They did not speak during intake. They did not look up when their chains were removed. They simply began to hum. At first the staff dismissed it as nervous behavior, but the sound grew, soft, layered, and perfectly in tune. At night, patients claimed they could hear church hymns drifting through the pipes, songs no one recognized, but everyone felt. Some said it brought peace. Others said it drove them into fits of weeping, as though the music remembered something their souls had forgotten. The nurses avoided that corridor after dark, and yet, each morning, someone would find dead birds outside the Crowley cell, arranged carefully in circles, their wings spread as if mid-flight. The sisters never left their room. They refused food, refused water, yet their bodies did not wither. Their pulse was faint, but steady. One orderly, a young man named Whitman, wrote in his log that he once saw them kneeling in the corner, hands clasped in prayer, whispering to something that seemed to answer. He claimed to see a shadow take shape on the wall behind them, a man's outline, tall and trembling, as if stitched together from smoke. Whitman resigned the next day and hanged himself 2 weeks later. By 1905, Bellhurst had become a place people feared more than pitied. The West Wing was sealed after multiple nurses fell ill with hallucinations. Doctors tried to separate the sisters, but every attempt ended in chaos, screams from the walls, lights bursting into flame, patients convulsing in other rooms. Eventually, the superintendent ordered them to be left alone. He called their cell the singing ward. That summer, the fire began. No one saw how it started, only that it spread fast, licking through the walls like a living thing. The West Wing was consumed in less than an hour. When rescuers broke through the smoke and ash, they found nearly every patient and staff member dead. But the Crowley sisters were still there, sitting together in the corner of their unburned cell, untouched by flame, their hymn as steady as ever. Bellhurst was abandoned soon after. The state sealed the records, calling the fire an accident. But stories spread of late-night travelers who heard faint singing from the ruins, of a ward that still hummed beneath the ground, waiting for dawn. Some said the sisters had never stopped their ritual. Others believed something far older had begun to sing with them. When the demolition crews arrived at Bellhurst in the spring of 1971, the asylum had already been lost to decades of rot and rumor. Ivy crawled over broken windows, and rain leaked through the ceilings where the West Wing once stood. The workers said the air there was different, thick, almost sweet, as if the walls themselves still exhaled something left behind. In the basement, beneath a rusted cabinet, they found a small film canister wrapped in wax paper. The label read in faint ink, "Crowley Archive, restricted." No one knew who had written it. The reel was turned over to a local historian who arranged to have it developed. What emerged from that flickering projection room that night would become one of the strangest pieces of evidence ever connected to the Crowley case. The footage was silent, grainy and uneven, but unmistakable. 7 women, all dressed in white, stood in a circle, their movements slow and synchronized, swaying as if in prayer. The room behind them was stone, its walls wet with condensation, perhaps the old Bellhurst cellar. As the film continued, the light caught something else. Shadows behind the women, 7 of them, elongated, human, hanging. Their outlines trembled faintly, as if trying to breathe. Experts later claimed it was double exposure, an optical flaw common in early film stock, but even they could not explain the final seconds. As the camera wavered, one of the women turned toward it. Her face came into focus. Young, unlined, impossibly preserved, Ada Crowley. Her lips moved, forming words without sound. Yet every witness who viewed that reel swore they could hear her voice in their minds. "He's still with us." The film ended there, the image freezing on her eyes, which seemed to follow the viewer long after the screen went dark. When the story broke, the state sealed the footage, labeling it fraudulent. But the discovery renewed interest in Marrow's Point. Archaeologists and forensic teams arrived to excavate the site of the old Crowley estate, now nothing but reeds and shallow pools. Beneath layers of mud and salt, they found remnants of the cellar, the stone basin, fragments of chairs, and dozens of glass jars buried in a perfect circle. Inside each jar was preserved tissue, all confirmed to be male. Each jar bore a word etched into its surface: redeemed. The findings were quietly removed from public record. Officially, they were lost in transport. But locals still talk about the night the excavation ended, how the crew packed up before dawn, leaving their tools behind, claiming they heard voices coming from beneath the marsh. Voices singing. No one lives near that water now. The old road to the Crowley house has vanished under tide and time. Yet when the fog rolls in from the sea, people still say they hear faint hymns carried through the air. 7 voices in perfect harmony, joined by something deeper, something that once called itself a man.